The best and the worst number one NHL defenseman. That's right, folks. After the center ranking, we're going through every single team, including your favorite team, picking the number one best defenseman and ranking every team's number one from worst all the way up to the best. But where does your favorite team's number one defenseman rank, and who are the best and worst number one defensemen in the NHL today? Watch till the end for the complete 2023 rankings, and hit that subscribe button if you're new for more hockey content just like this all year round. You won't want to miss a thing. Let's stop wasting time here though, because I got a lot of spicy takes in this ranking that I want to have the time to explain. We're going to start out here at number 32 and the worst number one defenseman in the entire NHL. And I have, drumroll please, from the Anaheim Ducks, Cam Fowler. Now, to me, Cam Fowler is a fine defenseman. He's an okay top four, but just hasn't really pushed much past that. This last year, 48 points in terms of production was one of his best, and it was the best in his NHL career, which is actually surprising to think about. 48 points in 82 games, but defensively is really where the pitfalls really come. This last year was great offensively, but defensively, he was really a big part of those Anaheim D woes. To me, with Fowler, he's fine, but he's not going to really impress you that much. Now, as I mentioned in my center rankings, I'm just judging these players on the last 3 seasons. That's what's most important to me, and that is the sample size we're working with here. So it makes the younger players at a little bit of a disadvantage, but still, I tried to adjust accordingly. At number 31, for the next number one defenseman, I have Juuso Valimaki of the Arizona Coyotes, who really broke out in a big way after getting claimed from waivers from the Flames. You can see the last couple of years before he went to Arizona, nothing all too special, hadn't really even played that many games. And then this year, in 78 games with the Yotes, got 4 goals, 30 assists, 34 points, and was excellent in both ends of the ice for the Arizona Coyotes, putting up that potential that we always knew he had, but really wasn't given the opportunity to really have in Calgary. Next to number 30, and a player that I think a little bit of recency bias might affect this ranking just a little bit, I have Travis Sanheim of the Philadelphia Flyers, who this last year was just bad. I mean, there's no sugarcoating it. He was not good this last year. Offensively, defensively, it was a garbage fire. But before that, I think the couple years before that, I think he did some really great things with Philly, especially in 2022, 31 points in 80 games, and defensively was one of Philly's best, if not their best defenseman. To me, I still think we could see that Travis Sanheim, though with how Philadelphia is shaping, he's going to get even more opportunity and even more minutes, which I'm not sure is quite best for him. Now I'm going on to number 29, and a player I really wish was completely healthy this last year, because he probably would have been a little bit higher if he was, and that's Mike Matheson of the Montreal Canadiens, who over the last 3 years actually hasn't been that bad. Now in 2021 wasn't anything special, but in 2022 took him some big steps in the overall game in that two-way game, both offensively and on the defensive side, getting 11 goals, and this last year when he was healthy, offensively exploded. 34 points in 48 games, and if that production continues, he'll be way higher next year, for sure. Next up, going on to number 28, and a player that plays pure defense and not really much else, in Colton Parayko of the St. Louis Blues. Now, Colton Parayko, throughout his time in St. Louis, has had some good seasons, some bad ones, but mostly it's come down to if that offense is there, because the defense is pretty consistent, pretty solid, and always at a great level. But offensively, especially when it comes to the pure play driving, this last year was disappointing from after a pretty disappointing 2021, for instance. The last 3 years, sample size doesn't really do him many favors, and he's just been kind of lesser and declining with St. Louis as they've gotten a little bit worse. Next to number 27, a player that is just a fascinating one to try and rank, and that is Darnell Nurse of the Edmonton Oilers. Now, Darnell Nurse isn't bad, but to say he's a number one quality defenseman on the Stanley Cup winning team, I'm not quite sure if he's that. Now, point production-wise, solid and consistent and a good offensive play driver, puts some big physical play, but the turnovers are just dreadful, and defensively, there's just a lot of times where I feel like I'm wanting more out of it. Now going on to number 26, and a player that's fallen a lot since last year's ranking, but that's just because of the bigger sample size, and that is Moritz Seider of the Detroit Red Wings. Now, this is not to say that Moritz Seider is a bad defenseman or will be a bad number one defenseman. He's already not, I don't really think. But this last year, a little bit of a decline, especially in the offensive play driving, even if he did still end up with 42 points. Defensively, though, when he was with Jake Wallman, he was still brilliant. And to me, I think there's still a little bit of hyperbole surrounding Moritz Seider's sophomore season slump. I don't think it was that bad, and he'll likely be a lot higher this next year after hopefully a big rebounding season for him and a upgraded season for the Red Wings in general. Now on to number 25, another defenseman that's lost quite a bit of ground, but that's mostly because a player is going up ahead of them, and that is Kris Letang of the Pittsburgh Penguins. Now, he's getting up there at age of 36, but there hasn't been too much of a decline, at least in the point production. 41 points in 64 games this last year after an incredible 2022 season. He did kind of decline a little bit, but considering the health issues he had, it's more than justifiable. He's still a fantastic offensive D, though the game around that hasn't always been the greatest, but I mean, we're talking about Kris Letang. The offense is that bread and butter and always has been. Now, speaking of defensemen that offensively, that is really their only bread and the only butter they have. At number 24, I got Morgan Rielly of the Toronto Maple Leafs. Now, offensively, we all know what Morgan Rielly can do, and he's still great. I just feel like, at least considering the regular season in the last few seasons, I think for a pure offensive defenseman that is as highly hyped as he is, the offensive production is a little bit disappointing. 41 points in 65 games this last year. He doesn't play defense. And even though he had a fantastic playoffs this last season, to me, I just kind of want more out of him than he's giving right now. Now on to number 23, and I did not expect for this player to rise as much as he did this last year, but looking at everything, at number 23, I have Seth Jones of the Chicago Blackhawks. Now, I know, okay, I know putting Seth Jones this high might seem blasphemous to some people, but he's actually kind of been good for Chicago this year. I know, I'm sorry, I know how crazy it is to say, especially since production-wise, it isn't spectacular this last year, 37 points in 72 games, but defensively is where I think we've seen the most improvement out of Seth Jones' game these last two seasons. Really adapting well for Chicago, and although not being anything special, still getting the job done on a Chicago defense that really gives him no help besides Connor Murphy. Next up, going on to number 22 here, though, and this is where we start to get into the good number 1 D, and this player had a little bit of a regression just slightly this last year, at least offensively, but I still think can be a number 1 D at this league, and that is MacKenzie Weegar of the Calgary Flames. To me, MacKenzie Weegar is in an interesting spot. Obviously, he took a dip in his production this last year, 31 points in 81 games, but to make up for it, had his best defensive year ever, and was one of the most efficient defensive players out there, even if it might not have seemed like it because of how crazy Calgary was this last year, but Weegar still played solidly and was still at a great level even with that dip in production. I think he can get back to that 40, 50 point level and bring amazing defense that we've really seen out of his entire career up to this point. Now, just missing the top 20, let's go on to number 21 here, and I mean, you could kind of put either Thomas Chabot or him in this spot, but I'm going to go with Jakob Chychrun of the Ottawa Senators. Right now, I would say he's Ottawa's best defenseman, but really, again, there's not much of a difference between him, Sanderson, and Chabot. I go Jakob Chychrun as of right now. Of course, you see just this last year what he was able to do in Arizona, still playing solidly in Ottawa, but I love the offensive instincts. The skating is still fantastic, and the physical play is great. Hopefully, we'll see that defense take a bigger next step this next year, maybe being on Chabot's pairing, but Jakob Chychrun I still like a lot, when healthy, but that, of course, has been the biggest problem over the last little bit. But now let's enter the top 20 number 1 Ds, and here we go on, and here we're going to move on to Columbus Blue Jackets number 1, Zach Werenski, who just like Jakob Chychrun has missed out on a lot because of injury troubles, and it's really a shame, especially in Werenski's case, because of how many games he's lost. This last year, only playing 13 games, but was brilliant in those games. 8 points and was playing some of his best defensive hockey he's ever played. If he's healthy this next year, I don't even care about the offseason additions they made. That is the biggest addition they would make if he plays a full 82 games. He helps that defense so much in every way, and offensively, although that's the best part of his game, his defensive game has taken some leaps and bounds, and that is great to see. Could be top 15 after next year. But next up, folks, let's move on to number 19, and a player that you gotta give credit to, you gotta give all the flowers to, because he has pretty much knocked all of those regression worries out of the way. And then is Drew Doughty of the LA Kings. Now, there was a point around maybe 2019, 2020, I guess, where he was starting to have a little bit of a decline. But to me, Doughty, over these last 2 seasons, has really got back to a great level, especially offensively. 31 points in 39 games in 2022, 52 points this last year, and solid in the playoffs. But the defensive play has also gotten back to a pretty solid level, above league average, and you combine that with the offensive play that he pushes. And at 33, Drew Doughty is doing about as good as he possibly can. Next up here, though, at number 18, and we're going to go to a player that will be much higher after next year if he continues what he was doing this last season, and that is Vince Dunn of the Seattle Kraken. Now, I couldn't possibly put him as much higher than this, but Vince Dunn was incredible this last season for Seattle. 64 points, 81 games, great in the playoffs, offensively was one of the best play driving D in the league, and defensively had his best season by far. Now, the last couple years before that weren't amazing, and that's what kind of holds it back, at least in the overall game, but he took that big step this last season, and I think deserves to be this high. Was such a juggernaut for that Kraken team. Next up, let's move on to number 17 and one of the most simple yet effective D in the entire league in Adam Pelech of the New York Islanders. Now, there's not a lot of fluff, there's not a lot of highlight reels here, and you're not going to be really expecting much offense. Over the past 3 years, his points high was 28 points, but he's simply one of the best defensive and physical players in the league. He's a player that is so efficient, so quiet, yet perfect at his role. He knows exactly what he wants to be, he knows exactly what he needs to be, and for the Islanders, as a number 1 D, defensively, he's one of the best out there. Next up, let's move on to number 16, just outside the top 15 here, and a player that had a little bit of a weaker regular season, but more than made up for in the playoffs. And we're talking about Aaron Ekblad of the Florida Panthers here, a player that over the past 3 years has done some really great things when he has been healthy. You see in 2022, 57 points in 61 games, an electric regular season. This year took a step back in really everything. Defensively, offensively, wasn't nearly as good as we expected, but in the playoffs was brilliant. In all 3 zones, he was a leader. He was a carrier of that defense. And even though Brandon Montour got a lot of attention, Ekblad was playing some of the best defensive hockey he's ever played. To me, when healthy, when at the top of his game, he is a top 10 D, but the health and inconsistencies hold him back for him. Now let's get started with the 15th pick and the top 15 number 1 D, and there's no better place to start than the Stanley Cup champion in Alex Pietrangelo of the Vegas Golden Knights. To me, he's very solid and very good, very consistent, and you can see this last year, 54 points in 73 games and great overall in the playoffs. And even though before the playoffs there were of course some defensive issues, this last year, defensively, he played some of the best defensive hockey he's ever played and has turned to a more overall well-rounded D. Nothing that's going to blow you away. That Vegas D core overall was fantastic as a group, but Pietrangelo is still an excellent number 1. Next up on a number 14, and a player that honestly might be still underrated in this league, and especially because of the health issues he had last year, I think is definitely underrated in terms of recency bias and everything. At number 14, I got John Carlson of the Washington Capitals. Now, sure, was his health this last year disappointing? Absolutely, but you see the past 3 years, when he has been healthy, he's still been one of the most competent and consistent offensive D. You can see in 2022, 71 points in 78 games, and defensively, although he's still not gonna really wow you, he's gotten to a pretty average level, which is a far cry from maybe earlier in his career. To be with Carlson, as he's aged, he's got a little more well-rounded, and just like Pietrangelo, has done some great things offensively in the past 3 seasons. Also, is anybody scared that it was 5 seasons ago that he won the Cup with the Caps? Let's just move on before it gets sad. And number 13, a player that for some people might be a little bit higher, but because of the 3-year sample size we're working with, at this spot, I have Josh Morrissey of the Winnipeg Jets. Now, sure, was he great this last year, especially offensively? Absolutely. 76 points in 78 games. But I do think even though this amazing year, defensively, he was still rather lacking, and the 2 seasons before this were just not good. He was down near the bottom in number 1 Ds for me, and even though one great offensive season is nice, not quite enough for me to have him in the top 12 or the top 10. Now let's go into a D that's pretty much the exact opposite as Josh Morrissey. In Minnesota Wild's number 1, Jared Spurgeon. Now, yes, in the playoffs, has he been amazing? No, but when we look at the overall play that he's had over the last 3 years, he's still been one of the best defensive transitional defensemen, and offensively should probably be putting up more points than he's getting right now with the teammates around him. I mean, he still puts up great offensive numbers, but on D, that's really where the fireworks are. And for a 5'9" defenseman, it still astounds me how quiet, how smooth he is on his own zone, and to me, that's just the best part about Spurgeon. He's just going to be super quiet, super consistent, and that's what you're going to get out of it. But now let's move on to the last defenseman outside of the top 10 here, and we're going to go to the New Jersey Devils number 1 in Dougie Hamilton. Now, to me, he might be the player I'm most happy about having this 3-year sample size, especially last season, because I was given a chance to not really rank him that low, because even though his 2022 wasn't that great, he was injury riddled and everything, I still was betting on the play that we saw before. And this last season, 74 points in 82 games. We knew Dougie was going to be good last year, but I was predicting a fantastic season out of him, and we absolutely got it. He is now a juggernaut on that Devils defense, and offensively is back to being one of the best in the entire league. Next up, we're starting the top 10 out here at number 10 with Quinn Hughes of the Vancouver Canucks. And just seeing develop over the last couple of years has been great to see. In 2021, 41 points, 56 games, 68 points in 76 games in 2022. And then this last year, getting closer to that point per game, 76 points, 69 assists in 78 games. That offensive game getting better and better, that defensive game getting better and better, even if it isn't at a great level yet still. Quinn Hughes has been fantastic for Vancouver. Really another player that has had to carry a defense all by himself, and at his young age, doing a pretty good job with it. Now let's move on to number 9, another player that had a brilliant offensive season, but the best offensive season out of anybody on this list, and that is Erik Karlsson of the San Jose Sharks. Now, as much as he had the best offensive season on this list, getting 101 points, he was also probably one of the worst defensive seasons out of anybody on this list. Still, though, the offense, I think, does outweigh the negatives, especially on that San Jose Sharks defense. He's a player, though, that has brought that offense through and through. This year in David Quinn's system, really got the reins to do whatever he wanted, which created some problems defensively, but offensively, you can't deny just how much of a rock star he's been. Next up, going on to number 8, another top Swedish defenseman. Here we have a player that has really come up in the two-way game for the first time in his career, and it was blissful to watch this last year, and that is Rasmus Dahlin of the Buffalo Sabres. Should have gotten a lot more Norris contention than he ultimately did. He had a brilliant season this last year, and offensively had a couple of good seasons, especially in 2022, getting 53 points in 80 games. But this last year, not only did he just skyrocket his career point total, 73 points in 78 games, he also defensively had by far the best season of his career. He was kind of average at best before this, sometimes even being a little less than that, but this year was spectacular in all three zones, and I would not be surprised if he's top 5 after this next season is over. Next up, going on to another Swedish defenseman here at number 7. I feel like a broken record, but going on to Tampa Bay Lightning franchise legend Victor Hedman, who unfortunately this last year absolutely took a step back, especially on defense, but just overall. I mean, 49 points in 76 games after having 85 points in 82 games last year. There was a case to be made that he could have won the Norris last season in 2022. He was dominant. But this year, offensively, it wasn't as good, and defensively, he took major steps back. Sometimes was a liability defensively, which is crazy to think about when we're talking about Victor Hedman, who before this was one of the most consistent D out there, but this last year took a chunk out of his stock for me. Now going just outside the top 5 here, next up, let's go into the Carolina Hurricanes. They're number 1 in Jaccob Slavin, who just continues to be one of the most consistent overall D in the NHL, and 2022 point production-wise was fantastic. Had a little bit of a dip back this year with 27 points in 76 games, but I mean, what is there to say that hasn't been said already? He's quiet, he's effective, he's forceful, defensively and physically. He is everything you want out of a D who can transport the puck well. He is just one of the best. He might be one of the best overall defensemen in the NHL, but you already knew that already. Come on. But now we have entered the top 5 number 1 D in the NHL. And here next up, I am going to go with Roman Josi of the Nashville Predators, who at 33 is still chugging along at an elite rate. You can see point-wise, he took it a step back for sure. I mean, he got 96 points in 80 games. It's hard to top that for him. 59 points in 67 games this last year, but the team in general did take a step back too. He was still as good as he's ever been offensively, and I mean, this last year did get better defensively, got to a pretty solid level, and to me, I think that was important for him too. Getting that overall game is definitely great. Still at his age though, still putting up great numbers. Next up though, going on to number 4, and my boy, you guys already know who I'm gonna put this high, because of course I had to put him this high. He is the absolute GOAT, and that is Miro Heiskanen of the Dallas Stars. The absolute legend comes in here at number 4, and it's, come on, I mean, are you really surprised to have seen me putting him this high? It's deserved though. You see what he's done the past 3 years, 2022, 2021 being one of the best defensive players in the entire NHL. This year I think took a little bit of a step back defensively, not a crazy amount though, and you see the offense he was able to put up 73 points, 11 goals in 79 games, and 12 points in 19 playoff games. Miro Heiskanen is elite, folks. If you want to deny it, too bad. Keep crying. Miro is here to stay. But now we go on to the elusive, the ever elite top 3. And to me, these guys are just cycling in that top tier of the NHL. We're going to start out here at number 3 with Charlie McAvoy of the Boston Bruins. Now, it was unfortunate to see a little bit of injury trouble this last year, only playing 67 games, but in those games got 52 points, and in the playoffs was solid there too. Defensively, I would say took a little bit of a step back. To me, he had a case made where he was the best defenseman defensively in the NHL before this year. A little bit of a step back there, but offensively put up major results and push play greatly. I think this next year, if we see him a little more healthy, hopefully we'll see him back at that amazing level. To me, he is just elite in every single category and has the skill to be elite there too. But next up at number 2 and number 1, these are two players that, of course, we have talked about a ton. We have talked about in their battle for that number 1 spot. Who is the best defenseman in the NHL? Adam Fox or Cale Makar? And to me, you could go either way. I could see why you go either way. As of right now, at number 2, I'm going to go with Adam Fox of the New York Rangers. And it is a slight. It is not a big difference to me at all. There are some people that say it is. I think if you think it's a huge difference between him and Makar, you aren't really watching Fox and what he's been able to do. Still, though, he is elite in everything. And I would say in the playoffs, offensively, he was still there. Though defensively, he took a little bit of a step back. That Game 7 was definitely poor for him. And there's a case we made if he was a little bit better defensively in the playoffs. I might have even had him a little bit closer to number 1. But Fox is still elite offensively. Still the most, maybe the smartest player in the NHL today. There's not a lot of players that can really rival how calculated he is in every decision he makes. Just an amazing defenseman, an elite one, a franchise face for the Rangers, and still likely their best player. Now let's move on to number 1 here and go on to the Colorado Avalanche. It is, of course, Cale Makar, who this year I wanted to see a big jump defensively, and man, did he show it. I mean, he got 66 points in 60 games. That health was an issue for him, and I could see why some people might have Fox ahead of him because maybe the health differences, but to me, I still think he was elite, and defensively, he was one of the best defensive players in the league this last year, which I think was a great improvement to see. Two-way wise, he was fantastic in 2022, but this year defensively showed really what he was made of, and to me, that is a great stepping stone. Still 24 years old, which is just feels unfair to say, but has the talent to be the best defenseman in the NHL and is as of right now. Now, of course, in this video, we were just ranking the number 1 D for every single team, so we could only choose one defenseman for every single team. For my actual top 10 defensemen, I have it go as follows. Makar, number 1, Fox, number 2, McAvoy, number 3, Heiskanen, number 4, Josi, number 5, Slavin, number 6, Hedman, number 7, Dahlin, number 8, Carlson, number 9, and then coming into the 10th spot, I have Devon Toews of the Colorado Avalanche, who has been dominant defensively the past 3 years, while also putting up great offensive results, and to me, he's one of the more underrated D in the NHL for sure, has always kind of been, and for Colorado is such a big part, a much bigger part of that team than I think a lot of people realize. But those are my rankings for the number 1 D in the NHL as of 2023. And of course, with all of these videos, I need to hear your thoughts. I want to know your thoughts. I want to know what you guys agree. What do you disagree with my complete rankings? How would you rank these number 1 defensemen? And let us know, of course, where does your favorite team's number 1 rank in this list? From 32 all the way to down to number 1. Let us know all your thoughts down below. Of course, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell if you enjoyed the hockey hype, and of course, all the hockey rankings. And share the video for all the hockey fans you guys know online. Get it to everybody you guys can. And click on this card for all my hockey rankings content right on playlist. Thank you so much for watching, y'all. This was such a fun one to put together and to make, and I hope you guys enjoyed. Drink some water, and I'll see you in the next one, ladies and gentlemen. Goodbye.